Hello, hello, and welcome to today's episode. With me, I have William Allen, who's asked me to call him Bill. So, hello, Bill, and welcome. I'm so glad to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here. It's great to be talking with you.
Yeah, you too. And we met because you mentioned you have written a couple of books about what it feels like or what it means to be a sensitive man. So I hope you're going to share a bit about that with us
Oh,
today.
I most definitely will.
Oh, that's good.
Absolutely.
But feel free to start out and tell us a bit about yourself and how you perceive the world as a sensitive.
That's a great segue into this. I was just thinking about this before we started talking. You know, there are quite a few highly sensitive people in the world, even though we're a small percentage by numbers, we're a fairly large group.
Yeah.
Each one of us is individual. Each one of us has unique experiences and so forth. But I think we all kind of share one thing in common for sure, and that is that we see the world through a sort of the same kind of lens or prism that high sensitivity brings to us. It
Yeah.
has those characteristics that Dr. Aaron always talks about, the four main characteristics. And we all share that same sort of experience. And I think that's the relatable point that we all
Yeah.
have with each other, is that even though our lives are different, even though our experiences are different, our backgrounds are different, and even our genetics are different,
Yeah.
we still share the world through that lens. And I
Mm.
think that's amazing. It's amazing how easily it is to talk to somebody who's highly sensitive and you get a rapport going with them almost right off the bat.
Yes.
Um, but anyway, I didn't discover that I was highly sensitive. When I say discover, I
Mm.
always knew growing up, and I'm
Yeah.
in my mid 60s now. I always knew there was something different about me. And certainly
Mm-hmm.
people did not hesitate in telling me that I was too sensitive or too moody or,
Yes.
too
Yep. Yep.
whatever,
Yeah.
at times. So I knew there was something different about me, but I went through most of my life, um, thinking there was something different about me, but I was trying to always fit in and get, you know,
Yeah.
have some place where I felt like was my own, even
Mm.
though I always felt a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I didn't really find out about high sensitivity until I was almost 50 years old and read Dr. Aaron's book, Highly Sensitive Persons. And
Yeah.
that was an eye opener for me. It
Yeah.
was like, as I was reading chapter after chapter, I kept going, yep, that's me.
Yep.
That's me.
Ticking all the
That's
boxes.
checking all the boxes off is so easy to do. But as a man, and this is kind of the difficult thing I'm finding in my
Yeah.
talks with other highly sensitive men, is
Mm.
trying to reconcile those sensitive traits to what we were socialized to believe what a man was supposed to be.
Yeah.
That masculine, almost distant, unemotional,
Mm.
stoic warrior,
Yeah.
totally logical, never intuitive kind of person.
And boys don't
And
cry
and
and all
boys
that.
don't cry. Boy,
Yeah.
that's probably the number one message. And you
Yeah.
know what? I was thinking about this even before we're talking. I was thinking about this morning, that one of the things that makes it so difficult, I think, for highly sensitive men to grasp this concept that it's okay and that it's a good thing and it's a gift, is that very often as children, we're shamed into
Yeah.
believing that if you are like highly sensitive people are, emotional, or you're deeply thoughtful, or you get
Yeah.
overwhelmed and
Yeah.
overstimulated, you don't know what to do with it, or just because of the sensory information you pick up from the world around you, that there's something not masculine about that,
Yeah.
and you start getting shamed about it. And
Mm-hmm.
those are happening to you when you're very young, when
Yeah.
you don't have the capacity as a child to think, well, that's just one person's opinion. That's really
Yeah.
not me. I'm, whatever. And I love me for who I am. You're taking this in
Yeah.
thinking that they're telling you the truth.
Yes.
So that shaming becomes a boundary
Mm.
for a lot of men to cross over to
Yeah.
accept their highly sensitive nature, right?
Yeah.
And their high sensing nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was no different. So here I was in my early 50s, reading about high sensitivity. This is probably in somewhere around 2000s, early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
I read it, it made sense to me, but I
Yeah.
could not embrace it. I couldn't accept it.
Oh.
I kept telling myself, you know, that's
Yeah.
all great, but I don't like the idea of being called a sensitive man. You know, I was
No.
pushed back. And it
Yeah,
was
there was
all
the
that,
understanding and then the emotion.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was all that emotional stuff you were talking about there.
Yeah.
It happened when I was a kid.
Yeah.
That's not good for a man to be that way. It's not masculine for a man to be that way. So it took about 10 years for me to
Yeah.
really get to the point where
Mm-hmm.
I could say, you know what, I'm gonna accept this about myself. I'm going to
Yeah.
embrace it and I'm going to be proud of it. And
Yeah.
I started writing a blog in around 2016 or so about my questions about being a
Mm-hmm.
man and being a sensitive man. And
Yeah.
that I have more questions that I had answers for. So I just kept writing and doing research and so forth.
Yeah.
And a couple of years into that, I had enough material, I thought, and I wanted to write a book. I wanted to write something that I could share, particularly with younger men
Yeah.
who are struggling with this notion maybe of being
Mm-hmm.
sensitive
Mm-hmm.
and their masculinity, and sort of as an older man reaching out and to discuss it. So the first book I had was about that. It was about my observations about life as a highly sensitive person.
Yeah.
And that kind of led me up to where I am now. I had lived my life as a corporate manager. I worked for a large bank in
Mm-hmm.
information technology, which
Yeah.
is a field that is not what I would call sensitive.
No, that's
It's
not my
anything
impression.
but.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's anything but. But
Mm-hmm.
I was able to manage to do well in it. I wasn't real thrilled about being there. That wasn't really what I would consider a calling for me, but it was something I could do and help me get my family raised and all that kind of stuff. And then
Yeah.
I decided to retire from that and go exploring and trying to find a different path. So the blog and the book, and now, you know, doing speaking for highly sensitive men and
Yeah.
engaging with highly sensitive men, that's become where my energy is going into now. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my story.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I'm still stuck on something you said right at the beginning, that as
Okay.
highly sensitive, it's typically easy to find a rapport. And I was thinking that maybe that's because we've been so starved, feeling different and alone, than when
Yes.
we finally meet someone who recognizes us. That's one of the things I remember from reading Dr. Aaron's book. It was like, oh my God, she's describing me.
Yes.
And I think that one thing is, as a woman, it's slightly more acceptable, I guess, to be, oh, she's just a little sensitive, or she's a little emotional or dramatic or whatever. But I can only imagine that as for a man, that it has an extra level of expectance from other people. And as you said, the shame and how we're taught that real men behave. So I'm curious to know how you have been met. I bet there's a lot of younger men out there who find a lot of comfort knowing that they're not alone.
Absolutely. You know what's true about that too is as I'm you know, starting this journey and I'm meeting lots of highly sensitive men of all age groups, is that the younger men are more open to the idea that the old traditional masculine role that men have played may not be the best role for men to be playing at this time in our history. That what men do now versus what they did, my father did, and my grandfather and so forth did, is completely different today.
So there
And
has been a natural shift. Is that what you're experiencing?
I think it's happening. It's almost like the crust under the earth, on the earth, right? It's, according to plate tectonics, it's always moving. Well, it's imperceptible sometimes, unless you're in an earthquake, that's going on. And I think that's happening now. There is a shift that's taking place, especially when Generation Z and millennial aged young people and young men are much more open to this idea of let's look at masculinity. Maybe we need to redefine what masculinity means. And that is giving me great hope, because a lot of men my age are set in the way they feel about masculinity, and even highly sensitive men my age struggle with this dichotomy of what I'm supposed to be versus what I am, and being who you truly are versus being what the world and society expects from you. And so that's kind of a push-pull with them. They're constantly struggling with that. And I think that's one of the reasons why, especially with the Facebook groups and other gatherings online of highly sensitive people, that it's disproportionately female versus male, because men are more reluctant to step up and say, I'm highly sensitive and so forth. And maybe it's the word, maybe that's the problem, but I really think there's more to it. I think that they're afraid. I mean, you've got the word sensitive, and it has all these connotations that people have said, and I've seen them too, that aren't necessarily positive. But it's everything underneath that. It's the stuff that makes highly sensitive people what they are. It's the emotional part of it, how we deeply feel about things. It's how we deeply process information. Sometimes we don't make decisions right away because we really get down in the weeds with stuff and really try to process it very deeply. It's the overstimulation that doesn't have connotations that are positive for men, because men are supposed to always be in control. But see, that's where the problem is too, is the expectations that we have of men is not being able to be emotional or be aware of their emotions, and not be able to be vulnerable, to ask for help. Right? Men are supposed to have all the answers, and they're supposed to be protectors, and they're supposed to be all these things, which are wonderful ideas in principle, but in practice, they're hard to do.
Yes, they can become exhausting trying to live up to something that's so against our nature.
Yes, absolutely. So anyway, I'm hoping that the more we talk about it, and there's some great books that are being written right now, have been written recently, last year, about being highly sensitive as a male. And I hope more and more men step up and either write blogs or get involved and write books with the experience part of it in mind. Because I think there's when you're talking about the science behind high sensitivity, everybody, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, it applies to everybody, right? And so we all have that kind of grounding if you've been around, read Dr. Aaron's books, or you've read her blogs, or you just generally have been talking with other HSPs. You'll know what those things are. But what's really helpful is to have these experiential books, these books about my life experience. This is how I did things, and this is how I got through, and this is because that becomes the relatable content. That other men can say, you know what, that was my experience too. And the funny thing, Trine, is that the idea is that I don't care what culture you come from, whether you're, in Europe, or whether you're in North America, whether you're in Asia. There's very similar experiences about this masculinity versus being highly sensitive that I have seen across the board. So there's a universal sort of angst, I think, amongst men about admitting and coming up and saying, look, I'm a highly sensitive person.
Talking about experiences and relatability, do you have any examples from your own life of situations where you found that courage or had enough or whatever, and stood up and said, here I am, and I'm sensitive, or I need more time to think about this in a personal relationship?
Well, as of certainly the last 10 years or so, I have
Mm-hmm.
really been more open about this and been
Mm-hmm.
more straightforward and discussing it in relationships with people that I had, in which I talk to them and tell them that I'm a sensitive person. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
funny, when I was writing the book, people were asking me, well, what are you up to lately? And I said, well, I'm
Yeah.
working on a book, and they want to know what the book was about. And I would
Mm-hmm.
find myself ready to start talking about it. And the little thing inside of me says, that's going to be difficult to explain, that you're a sensitive man. But you know what? I pressed on and I did.
Yeah.
And when you start talking and
Mm-hmm.
speaking from your true authentic self, the
Yeah.
confidence comes, the
Mm-hmm.
the you know the self-assurance comes. And very
Mm-hmm.
often, because of your collective experiences in life,
Yeah.
the words come out.
Yeah.
They're spontaneous. And the more I speak about it, the more I talk about this, I find that my confidence in speaking about this grows. And it comes across to people, because then they go, well, you know what? I relate to that too. And
Yeah.
it's a kind of a mutual thing where we're kind of
Mm-hmm.
feeding off each other at that point, because
Yeah.
I'm now feeling like I'm not the only person in the world that has these feelings. I'm not the only man who has these
Mm-hmm.
feelings. It's good to hear other men talk about that. So, sort of generally speaking, I have a specific example, but generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking, that's what I've been noticing, is that stepping
Yeah.
out in my,
Yeah.
uh, uh, going out and talking about high
Mm-hmm.
sensitivity has made me more confident in
Yeah.
myself as a highly sensitive man, as a highly sensitive person. And I think
That,
that's probably true for most of us.
yeah, probably. And that's a beautiful side effect, isn't it?
Oh, yes, yes,
Gaining that confidence. And I believe that when we have the courage to be vulnerable, that holds a space for others to show up as themselves as well, even
yes.
if they're not necessarily sensitive, but being in front of someone who's open and calm and confident and shares how they feel, it lowers our guard somehow, I find, and can create a connection. But you mentioned a specific example, if you like.
Well, I want to just quickly follow up with
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying there. It's like, yeah, I think that's why highly sensitive men, particularly, just to follow up that point you just made,
Mm-hmm.
can be great role models for other men who are
Absolutely. Yeah.
perhaps not as sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
um, but who needs to see how this works.
Mm.
Like you said, to be authentic and open, and we are like that. And we're
Yeah.
kind of like, okay, here we are,
Mm-hmm.
and let's talk. And we have this great sense of empathy about us. And I
Mm-hmm.
think people attach to that immediately when they
Yeah.
see that. So,
Yeah.
um, that's I think really where HSPs can really shine, especially
Mm.
HSP men,
Yeah.
in talking to other men as well.
Mm-hmm.
But just an example from work. When I was working, there was one of the things I did, uh, in working in information technology the way I did, and I
Mm-hmm.
find, ironically, a lot of highly sensitive people I've met have either worked in information technology or are working in it now.
Yeah.
And it didn't seem to be a field that would really appeal to us, but I guess there is
Mm-hmm.
some elements to it that really
Mm-hmm.
do.
Yeah.
But I found that the thing that I did best in that, and this is where I stood out, is I took great pride. I managed a staff of technical programmers and systems engineers and so forth, who are generally very bright people, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes a little bit too mechanical because of their
Yes.
the way they have to look at things. Everything's got to be logical.
Yeah.
But they related to me as a manager because I cared about what their back, I cared about what was going on with them. When we had
Yeah.
one-on-ones, I talk about if they had, things going on
Mm-hmm.
with their family. I wanted them to feel like they could talk to me, because
Yeah.
I really truly believed in work-life balance. I really believe that you
Mm-hmm.
have, so much time that you can devote to work, and then the rest of the time needs to be your time.
Yeah. Especially when you
There,
can't just shut off and switch
right,
when you go home.
exactly. And a lot of
Mm.
these guys couldn't do that because we had, the access from home, so they could log in and do work and so forth.
Yeah.
So I had to make sure that they knew that you don't have to be on all the time. There's certain times you have to call in because of outages and things like that. But for the most part, don't live your life here. You have a family, you have, kids or grandkids or whatever. Live your life too. And that was a good thing for me. Was going against the grain for many of the managers there. They were more about performance and about getting work done and all that kind of stuff. And I was more of the soft skill stuff. And that was really one of my proudest moments of being a highly sensitive person in an environment where that's probably not the top thing that they're looking for when they're looking for IT managers, but it is important. It's very important to be able to relate, especially in a corporate environment. So that was probably my example.
Yeah. And I can only imagine that how that must have been good to have someone on their side, someone who had that spaciousness about them to actually encourage having a life and taking care of family and stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, I think that's a natural HSP trait. It's, it wasn't just me, but it was something as an HSP, that's the thing that drove me. I could sense when they were feeling disconnected from their families, they were disconnected from their personal lives. And by paying attention to that kind of stuff, which HSPs tend to naturally do, the little things, the subtle things, then you can get out there and you can make, as a manager, you can say, okay, you need to take some time off. Why don't you go to your family somewhere and go do something fun?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, that as managers, that is an especially valuable quality, to be able to see people in detail and strength and weaknesses as well, probably.
Yes, absolutely. So anyway, it served me pretty well. In terms of my relationships with my staff and with my peers and even with my managers. And so even though that was the best part of the job for me, was the people part of it. At some point, the corporate grind just wore me down after many, many years. And that's why at the end, I kind of went to my manager and said, look, can you bridge me to retirement? Let me get out. And I want to start doing some things that I need to do. And I was very fortunate that I had someone who was understanding that way and was able to do that. So, it's challenging sometimes to be in a corporate situation like that, but it certainly can be done. And I think we need to be there in the corporate world to bring our HSP sensibilities into what very often could be this kind of drive and seeing only the bottom line and getting work done and whatever. And the fact that we're all people, that we're working together, that sometimes gets missed.
Yeah. I like to think that more and more big companies are becoming aware that there's a bit more to leadership than just making people do their jobs.
Right.
And I'm very happy that you shared your example, because I hope that encourages other sensitives, men and female, to try, to allow themselves to be who they are, because, as you said, that builds a kind of confidence that we might not expect upfront, because most of us are probably raised feeling different or even wrong, as you explained, with shaming. So making that shift and realizing that people actually react positively when we open up, I hope more people get to experience that.
Absolutely. And like I said, the things that come naturally to highly sensitive people or things like that relatability thing with
Yeah.
other people. I know here's a concern I have. A lot of highly sensitive people are parroting back what they've heard their whole lives about being sensitive,
Yeah.
that it's a negative thing, that it's a weakness, that it's frail. And so they see sensitivity sometimes in that light. And what I would like to share with people is this idea that there are challenges being sensitive. Yes, of course there are.
Yeah.
But there are so many gifts that you can provide. Just the thing you talked about right there, being able to relate to people within a corporate environment, within any kind of social environment, or with a community, is one of our greatest qualities. That being able to be empathetic and to be able to connect with somebody at a very intimate level and share with them and them share with us. That's what I think as a whole, we're good at doing those kind of things, but we don't give ourselves credit for that. And that's part of this idea of shifting the notion that sensitivity has these sort of pejorative connotations in culture, especially in Western culture, and shifting it to something positive about, let's take these gifts and let's use them the way nature intended for us to do, which is to be sort of that, I think Dr. Aaron says, the priestly advisors, the wise counselors, the people who are cautionary and people who advise the rest of civilization about things. You don't have to do it at a global level. You could do it at a small level. But the idea is be proud of who you are and be proud of being sensitive. It's not a disorder. It's not a dysfunction.
No.
It's a wonderful gift.
And I bet most people, they might not even have noticed, but sensitive people, friends and family come to them with problems, typically, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe that's a place to start, to notice how people seek you out, to ask for advice, or just air some thoughts with you because they know that you have a sympathetic ear and has their back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's so true. And in doing so, what you're going to find is that it is natural for you to do that. It's natural to be kind of the helper person. And again, this idea that we need to build confidence within highly sensitive people, that being sensitive is a good thing. It's a positive thing. The other things that we see as challenges, all that stuff can be managed if you are aware of it, if you are mindful of it, if you learn how to do things like how to calm your mind down and how to regenerate energy within yourself. Those are all the teachable things. These are all learnable things that you can learn to manage that part of it.
Absolutely.
But the other part is just natural. You just get out there and people want to talk to you because they know that you've got a sympathetic ear.
Yes, that's really good advice, I find, and a place that's not too big a leap to start. So these things you talk about, building the confidence and our role in society and among people, are those things in your books as well? Can people find more advice? And
yes, the first, like I said, the first book I wrote, which Confessions of a Sensitive Man, is about my experiences. So there is a lot of, I hope, a relatable material in there about being sensitive. And you don't have to be a man to read it, because the characteristics go across both genders. And there is some things in there where I suggest through my observations. But the second book, the one that just recently came out, is called On Being a Sensitive Man. And again, it's not just the things in there, not just for men, but it was kind of geared for that. Has more of a kind of I like to call it like a trail guide. It's if you're walking a trail and you've never been on the trail before, and you want to know a little bit about the trail, so you know what to look for and what to look out for and things like that, then that's kind of what this book is. It's more like a trail guide for that. It's advice in a somewhat general sense, but I think it's the advice about taking care of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and about being happy and confident as a highly sensitive person.
Oh, I love the sound of that. Thank you so much for your work. I
Thank you.
I really think that is all we need, just someone to understand us and encourage us. And I hope that with that, and maybe even things just naturally, as you said, moving in the right direction, the subtle tectonic shifts, that we might be heading to a future with more room for sensitive people of both genders.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that. I think that's the one thing that I get up every morning, and I think that we're moving towards that direction. I think highly sensitive people will be a big part of that.
Yes.
And there'll be others, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but we can be leaders in so many ways. Even in our highly sensitive ways, we can be thought
Yeah.
leaders, and we can be influencers, and we can be advisors, and there's lots of roles we can take on. And much of that is just naturally us being us.
I love that, because that's the best job in the world, isn't it? Being who you
Absolutely.
are.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and your work with us. I
Thank you
will.
so much.
Mm,
Thank you so much for having me.
absolutely. It's been my pleasure. And I want to make sure that you send me your links and your for your books, and where people can find you if they want to continue this conversation.
Absolutely. And I would encourage people, and I will send you the links and so forth. You can put them on
Mm-hmm.
the
Show
podcast.
notes.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but The Sensitive Man is my website. TheSensitiveMan.com. It's
Mm-hmm.
the long word.
Yeah.
But I would encourage people who have any questions or want to create a dialogue with me to please do so. I enjoy answering emails and talking to people and so forth. It's always good to reach out and make connections.
It is indeed. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.